When billionaire Ellis Vance received his engraved invitation to the city's most exclusive gala, he almost tossed it aside. Another night of champagne toasts, hollow praise, and women who only saw dollar signs in his eyes. It all felt like a performance he'd grown too tired to play. But this time, appearances mattered. His competitors would be there, watching every move. He needed a date. So, with the same casual authority that ran his empire, Ellis looked across his glass-walled office and said 5 words that changed everything. "Come with me tonight, Jessalyn." Jessalyn Hart had been his secretary for years. Efficient, steady, almost invisible in the whirlwind of his billion-dollar life. To him, she was schedules and files, never the woman behind them. Until that night. When she stepped out of her modest apartment in a gown the color of midnight starlight, Ellis forgot how to breathe. The silk hugged her in ways that made the chandeliers of the gala seem dim, her quiet confidence radiating more power than any heiress in the room. He had only meant to bring her as a shield against gossip, a convenient +1. What he never expected was that one look at Jessalyn would shake the foundations of the man who prided himself on being unshakable. One invitation, one dress, and Ellis Vance was falling, harder than he ever thought possible. The gala invitation sat on my desk, heavy stock and gold filigree, as if weight could make emptiness matter. I'd been to 100 nights like it, rooms lacquered with money, conversations that skim the surface like stones, laughter that sounds like glass underfoot. Success buys access, not sincerity. I'd built an empire from contracts and leverage, but these rooms always reminded me how little leverage I had against hollowness. Power is loud in public and quiet at 3 a.m., and I was tired of listening to the quiet. My office looked out over a city that worshipped motion. From here, the streets stitched themselves into patterns that promised purpose. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt sterile, as if every immaculate surface reflected a man perfected for other people's expectations. I ran a thumb along the invitation's beveled edge and thought about skipping the performance. Let the columnists murmur that Ellis Vance had grown arrogant. Let the board call it eccentricity. I could carry those adjectives the way I carried my watches: expensive, interchangeable, unnecessary. But the gala wasn't just noise. Every major rival would be there, smiling in the carefully calibrated way that hides teeth. Deals have a way of happening under chandeliers. Appearances grease gears. You don't win by announcing your disdain for the arena. You win by owning the floor. I looked through the glass at Jessalyn's desk. She was there, spine straight, wrist angled over the calendar like a conductor's baton. Her hair, usually pinned into a workmanlike twist, showed a stray curl near her ear that refused to obey. She didn't notice my attention. She was too busy translating chaos into order, doorways into routes, requests into outcomes. She had been with me for years, an unflappable axis around which my days spun. Efficient, precise, the kind of competence that disappears because it never falters. The thought arrived without ceremony. Take Jessalyn. Not as a statement, not as a game. As a solution to the optics problem, yes. But it carried a quiet rightness I didn't examine. I pressed the intercom. "Jess, step in." She entered with her tablet and a pen that never runs dry. "End of day brief, Mr. Vance." "Later," I said. I tapped the ivory rectangle. "Come with me tonight." Her pen paused midair. "To the gala?" "Yes." Casual, functional, the way I delegate a flight or a fire drill. "We leave at 7:30. I'll have Ward bring the town car around the south entrance. Security will coordinate with hotel staff for a private corridor. Black tie." A flicker crossed her face. Surprise, then calculation as she mapped contingencies. Understood. No protest. No performative modesty. Just competence wrapping itself around a new instruction. "I'll adjust your 6 o'clock and send the final deck to your phone." "Thank you." It sounded small for the weight she carried every day. She left. The door closed with a soft seal. I turned back to the skyline and waited for the familiar satisfaction of a solved problem. It didn't arrive. Instead, a disquiet set in, like the sensation you get when an elevator stops half a floor short. I brushed it off as the unease of breaking routine. The afternoon unfolded in controlled increments. A call with legal, a terse exchange with Kincaid's people about a supply bottleneck, press statements that said nothing elegantly. Through all of it, my mind kept drifting to the vacancy where Jessalyn usually sat when she briefed me between meetings. I told myself I was rehearsing the night's steps, not anticipating her company. At 7:28, I straightened my cufflinks and let the office empty itself of sound. The elevator chimed, the doors parted. She stepped out, and the world I'd curated around efficiency and restraint slid out of frame. The gown was the precise blue of midnight an hour before the stars show, silk that caught light without begging for it. It shaped itself to her with the kind of engineering I respect in architecture. Nothing extraneous, every line purposeful. Her hair was free of the day's discipline, soft waves grazing her collarbone. A single drop earring moved when she did, not an announcement, just a quiet punctuation. She held a small clutch like she held everything, without fuss. "Mr. Vance?" she said, and my name in her voice felt different, like a familiar room seen from a new doorway. I stood slower than I meant to. "Jessalyn?" Her mouth tilted into a half smile, professionalism shading curiosity. "I hope this is appropriate." Appropriate. The word belongs to policy and dress codes, not the sensation folding open in my chest. "You look—" I stopped. There's a kind of compliment men like me get wrong because we've bought too many versions of it. I adjusted to truth. "You look extraordinary." Color rose in her cheeks, but she didn't avert her gaze. "Thank you." She glanced downward, smoothing an invisible seam, then back at me. "Cars waiting." We moved through the hallway in step. Employees still at their desks pretended not to stare. Ward opened the door, and the cold met us with a clean edge that felt like permission. In the car, city lights braided themselves into lines. Her reflection in the window floated beside mine like a second narrative. She sat with her hands composed in her lap, knuckles relaxed, eyes taking in everything as if tonight were a test she intended to pass. "You don't have to talk," I said, and surprised myself with gentleness. "It's a short drive." "I know how to be quiet," she replied, a hint of humor in it that made me want to hear the version of her that laughs freely. The hotel loomed, a palace built to make the rich feel mythic. Cameras flashed, the velvet rope bowed. When we stepped out, conversations hiccuped. Attention is a climate. You feel the pressure change. I offered my arm. She placed her hand there, cool and steady, and for a heartbeat I felt a sense of rightness so absolute it resisted analysis. Inside, chandeliers lifted light into bouquets. Music threaded the air. The scent of white flowers and polished wood made an argument for elegance I almost believed. We crossed the marble as if we'd rehearsed it. A woman in a column of silver assessed Jessalyn and found her unclassifiable. A man in a dinner jacket tried to locate her on the map of known social assets and failed. Their confusion amused me. We made our way toward the sponsors line, a procession of congratulations that means leverage later. People greeted me with the usual blend of curiosity and calculation. Tonight, their eyes kept returning to her. She handled it with a calm that made me want to shield her and show her off in the same breath. Then we reached the ballroom doors. The quartet paused between pieces. In the hush, a photographer's flash timed itself with her step forward. She looked up at the chandelier, at the small galaxies trapped in crystal, and smiled. Not for them, for herself. The gown caught the light and returned it like a secret. In that exact breath, something inside me tilted. The sterile world I had organized around utility and dominance made room for a fact I hadn't anticipated. I had never really seen her. Not the architecture of her composure, not the intelligence behind her economy of words, not the contained warmth that now, in satin and light, was unmistakable. My pulse did the thing it does when a deal shifts unexpectedly. Faster, hotter, alive. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't optics. It was recognition. Have you ever looked at someone you thought you knew and realized you never truly saw them until that moment? Comment if you've had that moment. Ellis Vance had long ago learned the art of wearing armor made of suits, signatures, and silence. The billionaire's life was stitched together by contracts and power plays, but behind the glass walls of his empire, emptiness thrummed like a second heartbeat. Betrayals had taught him lessons no school ever could. Trust was a liability, affection a trap, and love nothing more than a contract with clauses designed to fail. Every woman who had crossed his path in the years since had come looking not for the man, but for the brand. He stopped offering anything else. He stopped expecting more. Jessalyn Hart, however, did not walk into his life seeking to climb. She arrived years ago in a plain suit, her portfolio precise, her voice steady but unpretentious. She had grown up in small spaces where money evaporated before the month was over, where art supplies were luxuries whispered about but never bought, and where practicality ruled over dreams. Yet her hands still itched for lines and colors, her notebooks hiding sketches she rarely let anyone see. She had learned how to build stability out of scarcity, and when Ellis interviewed her, she didn't ask about perks or power. She asked about systems, structure, and whether efficiency meant more to him than speed. He hired her because she was different. He kept her because she never failed. Their rhythm became a choreography of necessity. Ellis dictated. Jessalyn delivered. She rerouted flights, blocked calls, anticipated needs he didn't voice. She learned the cadence of his moods, when silence was required, when the black coffee needed to be stronger, when the faintest hesitation in his voice meant a door needed closing. She was indispensable, so seamless that she became invisible. He leaned on her without thought, the way men lean on marble pillars, until one day he asked her to stand beside him at a gala and the marble revealed it had been a living, breathing woman all along. For Jessalyn, the request was disorienting. She was not unused to long hours, not unused to carrying Ellis's empire on her shoulders in silence. But a gala? That was not the terrain she usually walked. It was the domain of silk-wrapped women who dripped with diamonds, women who had inherited their places in those gilded halls. She had grown up watching from the outside of places like that, a girl with charcoal-stained fingers sketching gowns she would never wear. The thought that Ellis Vance, of all men, would ask her to step into that glittering sphere unsettled her as much as it thrilled her. Why her? Why now? She spent the afternoon doubting. In the mirror of her modest apartment, she saw not the woman Ellis employed, but the child of a mother who had said, "Art will never pay the bills." She traced her own reflection with critical eyes, wondering if she was a placeholder, a convenient shield against gossip, or worse, an experiment. Yet beneath the doubt was a flicker of something braver. If she could stand beside Ellis in a boardroom, invisible but irreplaceable, perhaps she could stand beside him beneath chandeliers, visible at last. Ellis, meanwhile, began to notice things he had ignored for years. How Jessalyn touched the small chain at her neck whenever she was uncertain. How she typed with flawless confidence, except when she erased and retyped messages that mattered. How her voice never rose, but carried a calmness that steadied even his worst storms. She had been a constant so reliable he had stopped seeing her as anything but function, and yet in the quiet hours before the gala, he found himself watching her in ways that unsettled him. He told himself it was logistics. He needed a date. He needed appearances polished, that was all. But when Jessalyn's uncertainty flashed in her eyes, "Are you certain about this? People will talk." Something inside Ellis tightened. She was not afraid for herself. She was afraid for him, of the scrutiny that would fall harder on her shoulders than his. That kind of loyalty was rarer than gold in his world, rarer than trust. And so the balance shifted, though neither would admit it yet. He had lived years convinced that relationships were nothing more than transactions. She had lived years convinced her place was only ever behind the curtain, never on the stage. That night, As they prepared to step into a ballroom together, the first fragile thread between them tightened. Neither of them said it aloud, but both of them felt it, the quiet suspicion that they were about to see one another for the very first time. Alice's world was still sterile, Jessalyn's still humble, their connection still buried under years of routine. But beneath the polished surface, the first seeds of change had been planted. For Ellis, it was the realization that Jessalyn was not just the secretary who kept his empire standing. For Jessalyn, it was the question of why a man who trusted no one had asked her to stand in the most visible place of all. And in that quiet tension, the story began to shift from schedules and contracts towards something neither of them had prepared for: the possibility of seeing and being seen completely. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, every crystal catching light and scattering it across gowns worth fortunes and tuxedos tailored to perfection. The hum of conversation layered itself over the quartet's careful notes, the air thick with perfume, ambition, and the faint tang of champagne. This was Ellis Vance's world, a place he knew as well as the boardroom. Yet tonight, the familiar arena shifted the moment Jessalyn walked in beside him. Eyes followed her instantly, not just because she was new, not because she was unknown, but because she was radiant in a way that unsettled expectation. The gown, simple yet commanding, curved with elegance rather than ostentation. Where the socialites of the city wore jewels like armor, Jessalyn carried only quiet confidence, and it shone brighter than diamonds. The room took notice. Ellis had expected whispers, speculation, calculation, the usual tallying of who mattered and who didn't. What he hadn't expected was the wave of attention she drew, as if the crowd instinctively recognized something they could not label. Socialites measured her with narrowed eyes, rivals measured him with sharper ones, and for the first time in years, Ellis felt a protective edge flare in his chest. It was instinctive, startling. He had brought her here as a solution, a shield. But standing beside her, he realized he wanted to shield her from them. Jessalyn felt every glance like static against her skin. She had rehearsed composure in the mirror, but under chandeliers and scrutiny, it took everything she had not to falter. Yet she did not drop her gaze. She had grown up in smaller rooms where judgment came harsher and closer. These glittering eyes were no different. She lifted her chin, and when Ellis guided her toward the first cluster of power brokers, she walked as though she had always belonged. Introductions blurred, names laced with titles, laughter sharpened with strategy. Ellis's competitors smiled too wide, probing Jessalyn with questions that pretended to be harmless. Where did you study? What family are you from? How long have you been working with Ellis? The undertones were clear. Who are you, really? And why are you here? Jessalyn answered with poise, neither embellishing nor shrinking, her honesty disarming. Ellis watched the exchange with mounting tension. He was used to women in his orbit answering with rehearsed charm or deflection. Jessalyn offered truth, modest, unadorned, and unexpectedly magnetic. And the more she spoke, the more he noticed. The timbre of her voice, the spark in her eyes when she described a logistical victory, the way she smiled faintly when the quartet shifted into a waltz she recognized. Small details, invisible until tonight, now impossible to ignore. The music swelled. Couples drifted to the dance floor, silk brushing against polished marble. Ellis hesitated. He had never been a man to waste time on dances. They were performances, not pleasures. But tonight the thought of not asking her felt wrong, like leaving something unfinished. He turned to Jessalyn. Dance with me. She blinked, startled. Here? Now? Here. Now. His hand extended, steady. For a breath she weighed refusal. Then she placed her hand in his, and the world tilted. On the dance floor, the crowd became a blur at the edges. Ellis's palm found the small of her back. Her other hand rested lightly against his shoulder. They moved through the steps, forward, side, close. But the precision of the waltz became something else entirely. Heat flickered in the space between their bodies, in the way her eyes met his and refused to drop, in the subtle catch of her breath when his hold guided her through a turn. For Ellis, it was the first moment in years he felt the world shrink to something simple. Two people moving in rhythm, no negotiations, no angles, just motion and presence. For Jessalyn, it was both terrifying and thrilling to feel seen, to feel his attention not as a boss but as a man whose focus made her pulse race. And then the interruption came. Richard Kincaid, a rival billionaire with a smile that never reached his eyes, stood near the dance floor with a glass of amber liquor. He watched them with thinly veiled amusement, and when Ellis guided Jessalyn into a pause, Kincaid stepped forward. "Ellis," he drawled, "you've always known how to surprise. Though I must say, this one is unconventional." His gaze slid over Jessalyn with deliberate slowness, dismissive and cutting. A secretary in silk, bold, though some might say cheap distractions are better kept out of sight. The words were soft, but sharp enough to draw blood. The surrounding guests caught them and waited, eyes bright with the promise of scandal. Jessalyn stiffened, heat flooding her cheeks. For a moment, silence pressed down, daring Ellis to laugh it off, to minimize, to retreat into the familiar armor of indifference. But Ellis did not laugh. His jaw tightened, his eyes went cold steel, and when he spoke, his voice carried through the marble and music. "She is not a distraction," he said, each word precise, deliberate. "She is the reason my empire stands, when men like you hope it falls. If you can't recognize worth beyond your ledger, Richard, perhaps it's your vision that's cheap." The air crackled. Kincaid's smirk faltered just for a second before he covered it with another sip of whiskey. Around them, whispers erupted like sparks, admiration and shock weaving together. Jessalyn's hand trembled in Ellis's, not from fear, but from the surge of something fierce and unfamiliar, being defended, being claimed not as an accessory, but as someone who mattered. The music swelled again, but the dance was different now. Their steps were tighter, the air charged. Ellis's gaze lingered, darker, protective, questioning why it mattered so much. Jessalyn's heart raced, wondering if this was the beginning of something neither of them could step back from. And in that moment, beneath chandeliers and judgment, the first undeniable crack split Ellis Vance's armor. The man who believed love was a transaction had reacted not with strategy, but with fire. Would you have stood up and risked reputation to defend someone in a room like that? Or would you have stayed silent? Comment your thoughts below. The night did not release Jessalyn easily after Kincaid's sneer. Whispers rippled through the ballroom like a tide, faces turning too quickly, eyes sliding away only after lingering long enough to leave their weight upon her. The chandelier light seemed sharper, the marble floor colder, the perfume heavier. She had stepped into Ellis's world with borrowed poise, but now every glance felt like judgment measuring and dismissing her in the same breath. Ellis noticed. His gaze moved across the room with the precision of a hawk circling prey. He saw how the whispers angled toward Jessalyn, how the sharp smiles tilted like blades in velvet gloves. Protective anger coiled in him, an instinct he had never associated with any woman at his side before. He leaned toward her, voice low but steady. "Don't look at them," he said. "They don't matter." But Jessalyn's composure faltered for the first time. "They're all looking at me," she whispered, her hand tightening slightly on his arm. "Then let them," Ellis replied, sharper than he intended. "It only proves they've never seen anything real." His words steadied her, though the tension remained. They moved together through the clusters of guests, Ellis's arm firm at her back, a shield and a warning all at once. Every introduction now carried an undercurrent. Was she his date, his distraction, his newest scandal? And every time, Ellis introduced her with deliberate clarity. Jessalyn Hart, the woman who keeps this empire standing when the rest of us are busy pretending it runs itself. Still, the rumors stirred. By the time champagne flutes were refreshed, whispers had hardened into speculation. Some said Ellis was flaunting his secretary to insult the board. Others suggested Jessalyn was the hidden mistress finally dragged into the light. Jessalyn heard fragments, shards that cut when they brushed her ears. She swallowed them quietly, but Ellis saw the set of her jaw, the shadow in her eyes, and each one struck him like an accusation. The night thickened with tension, and then another storm entered the ballroom. Serena Duval, Ellis's former lover and one of society's most polished faces, approached with the glide of a predator who already owned the room. Her gown was a slash of scarlet, her jewels calculated to blind. She smiled at Ellis as if no years, no break, no silence had ever passed. "Ellis," she purred, offering her hand. "It's been far too long. I was beginning to think you'd hidden yourself away." His grip was polite, curt. "Serena?" Her gaze shifted to Jessalyn, sliding over her like a verdict already written. "And who is this? A new arrangement?" Jessalyn felt heat rise in her cheeks but held her ground. "Jessalyn Hart," she said evenly. "Mr. Vance's secretary." The pause was deliberate. Serena's laugh was a ripple of champagne poured too quickly. "How refreshing. Though I must say, Ellis, you've always had impeccable taste until now. She seems rather out of place here." The insult was wrapped in silk, but the meaning struck clean. Jessalyn forced her breath steady, though inside her insecurities screamed that Serena was right. She did not belong among women who had grown up in these rooms, women who wore confidence as casually as couture. She was a secretary in satin, and nothing could change that. But Ellis's voice cut through the sting like steel through glass. "She belongs anywhere she chooses to be," he said, his tone brooking no argument, "including here." For a moment, Serena faltered. Then her smile returned, sharper than ever. "How charming," she said, before drifting away on the arm of another man, leaving the air poisoned in her wake. Jessalyn's composure cracked in the silence that followed. "She's right," she murmured, barely audible. "I don't belong here. This isn't my world." Ellis turned to her fully, searching her face. "Jessalyn, listen to me. You belong wherever you decide you belong. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Not Serena, not Kincaid, not anyone." Her eyes lifted to his, uncertain, but she held them. In that moment, something in Ellis shifted. He had never defended a woman like this before. Not because he couldn't, but because none of them had ever mattered enough. Jessalyn mattered. More than he had expected, more than he was ready to admit. Later, when the crowd thinned toward midnight, Ellis guided her away from the crush of voices to a quieter corner of the terrace. The city stretched below, lights burning against the dark like defiant stars. The cool air was a relief against the heavy perfume of the ballroom. Jessalyn leaned on the railing, the satin of her gown whispering against stone, her shoulders finally dropping as the tension bled out. Ellis stood beside her, hands in his pockets, silence stretching between them. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke, not as the billionaire who commanded rooms, but as the man who hadn't spoken of his emptiness in years. "Do you know what I hate most about those nights?" he asked. She turned, surprised. "What?" "The noise," he said. "Everyone talks, but no one says anything. They measure, they bargain, they pretend. But no one is honest. It's exhausting." Jessalyn studied him, seeing for the first time not the untouchable mogul but the man behind the armor. "You sound lonely," she said softly. He let out a short laugh, but it carried no humor. "Maybe I am." The admission startled even him, but once spoken, it could not be taken back. Jessalyn held his gaze, and something gentler stirred in her chest. "You don't have to be," she said, almost a whisper. Silence settled again, but it was different now. Less heavy, more alive. Ellis glanced at her, searching her profile. "And what about you?" he asked. "What do you hate most about these nights?" Her fingers traced the railing absently. "That they remind me of everything I wanted once and gave up." "What was that?" Art, she admitted. Design. When I was little, I used to sketch gowns on diner napkins. I thought maybe one day I could create them. But then life happened, and practicality was safer. Ellis's brows drew together. He had seen fragments, sketches left behind on her desk, lines of fabric rendered in graphite, but he had never asked, never cared enough to, until now. "You still draw," he said quietly. Her head snapped up. "You noticed?" "I notice more than you think," Ellis replied, his voice low. "Maybe I just never let myself see it before." The words lingered, weighty, intimate. Jessalyn's breath caught, and she looked away toward the skyline, her heart unsteady. For the first time that evening, it wasn't judgment that made her pulse race. It was possibility. Behind them, laughter spilled from the ballroom, but it sounded distant now. The true gala was happening here, between two people standing closer than they realized, sharing truths neither had expected to reveal. In that fragile exchange, his confession of loneliness, her admission of dreams, their connection deepened. And though neither dared to name it yet, both felt it. The pull of something dangerous, something tender, something that could no longer be ignored. The night had grown thick with music and murmurs, the chandeliers burning lower but the tension higher. Jessalyn had found a fragile rhythm in Ellis's shadow, walking where he guided, answering with polite steadiness, carrying herself as if she belonged even when doubt clawed at her chest. Yet no amount of composure could soften the sharp words she wasn't meant to hear. She had slipped away for air, her gown whispering along the marble corridor beyond the ballroom. Voices echoed near the terrace doors, two men leaning with their glasses of brandy, their laughter cruel and low. "Vance has lost his touch," one said, his smirk audible. "A secretary dressed up like royalty? Please, she's a pawn, nothing more. He parades her to distract us from the cracks in his empire." The other chuckled. "And the poor thing thinks she's special. She doesn't see she's only a shield, a convenient diversion. Disposable." The words hit Jessalyn like glass shattering inside her chest. She froze, breath caught, heart hammering. Disposable, pawn, shield. Each word burned itself into her mind. She retreated before they saw her, the music swelling again as if mocking her. Back inside, Ellis stood near the edge of the dance floor speaking with a senator, but his eyes flicked to her the moment she appeared. He noticed the tremor in her step, the way her gaze wouldn't hold steady. With a quiet excuse, he crossed to her. "What happened?" His voice was low, urgent. Jessalyn lifted her chin, though her eyes shimmered with hurt. "Tell me the truth, Ellis. Am I just a shield? A distraction for your enemies to mock?" The question sliced through him. He had expected many things from the night, but not this. "Who told you that?" "I heard them," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Your competitors. They think I'm nothing more than a pawn you brought to keep the vultures busy." She took a breath that caught in her throat. Were they wrong? Silence stretched between them, sharp and unbearable. Ellis's jaw tightened. He could have lied. He could have denied. But Jessalyn deserved truth, even if it cut both of them. "At first," he admitted, his voice rawer than she had ever heard. "Yes. I thought bringing you would silence gossip, redirect their eyes, make them underestimate me while they whispered about you." Her lips parted, pain flashing across her face. She looked away, the sheen of unshed tears catching in the chandelier's light. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back, her dignity a fragile shield. "But that changed," Ellis continued, desperate now. "The moment you walked into that ballroom, Jessalyn, everything changed. I thought I was bringing my secretary, my right hand, my shield. But when I looked at you, truly looked, I saw more than I have in years. I saw the woman who's been right in front of me, stronger than the rest of them combined." She shook her head, voice cracking. "You can't just say that because you're angry at Kincaid or Serena. You can't make me your weapon against them." This isn't about them. Ellis's voice rose, sharp enough to draw glances. He lowered it, stepping closer, his eyes burning into hers. This is about me realizing I don't just want the woman who manages my empire. I want the woman who makes me believe there's something real left in my life. I want you, not as a shield, not as a pawn, not as my secretary. His breath hitched. I want you for real, Jessalyn. The words fell heavy, irreversible. Her heart slammed against her ribs, disbelief colliding with longing she had buried too deep. For years she had stood at his side, invisible and necessary, never daring to imagine more. And now, in the middle of a ballroom filled with eyes waiting to see her fail, Ellis Vance was saying he wanted her, not as convenience, not as image, but as the woman who had undone his armor. Jessalyn's throat ached as she whispered, "And what happens when they tear us apart? When your board demands you choose between me and them? When the tabloids call me a gold digger and a fraud?" Ellis reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't pull away. He held it firmly, his thumb brushing over her skin as though to anchor her. "Then let them. Let them call us whatever they want. I've built walls my whole life, Jessalyn. Tonight, I realized I'd rather burn them down than live behind them without you." The music swelled, the quartet beginning another waltz. But neither moved. They stood there, locked in a fragile storm of truth and fear, the ballroom blurring around them. Jessalyn searched his eyes, saw the sincerity trembling beneath his steel, the loneliness he had confessed on the terrace now laid bare. Her pulse raced. Her instincts screamed for retreat. But her heart whispered of possibility, of a man who had finally chosen to see her. The night pressed forward, but between them hung a revelation that could not be undone. Would you risk your career and heart for love, even if it might all fall apart? Share your thoughts below. By morning, the gala boiled down to headlines, photos relentless. Jessalyn stepping from the car on Ellis's arm, turning beneath the chandelier, framed beside Serena's smile. Secretary in silk, office romance, or image repair. The worst ran a split screen of spreadsheets and satin with gold digger stamped in tabloid typography. None of them showed the terrace or the tremor in Ellis's voice when he chose her in the room of wolves. In the office, glass felt colder. Assistants whispered and looked away. Messages stacked with concern disguised as courtesy. Investors requesting clarity, a columnist requesting comment, 3 board members requesting discretion. Jessalyn arrived early, hair pinned, face composed, the gown replaced by a modest blouse. Still, glances clung to her like lint. She slipped into the conference room and closed the door. For 1 minute, she allowed humiliation to crest. She had survived worse. Empty refrigerators, rent due, interviews where her shoes betrayed their price. But being dragged publicly for daring to stand in a room not built for her cut deeper than she expected. She pressed her palms against the cool table and breathed until she could stand straight again. Ellis found her there with a tablet. Headlines crawled like static. "It's noise," he said, though his jaw betrayed him. "This will pass." She searched his face for proof. Will it? The question carried everything: his reputation, her dignity, the bruise of being misnamed. Before he could answer, Ward knocked. The board moved up the call. They went together. Faces appeared on screens, people who valued Ellis's victories because they could count them. Davenport began without preamble. "Ellis, the optics are unacceptable. Our partners are unsettled. End the distraction. Reaffirm focus." "By distraction, do you mean my employee?" Ellis asked evenly. "We mean the narrative," Davenport said. "This is a multi-billion-dollar organization, not a stage for experiments. Quiet it down, distance yourself. Issue a statement that there is no relationship and that Ms. Hart will be reassigned to a non-visible role." Reassigned landed like a gavel. Jessalyn sat. No one addressed her directly. She existed as a variable to be minimized. Ellis's silence lengthened. He could end this with one sentence and the world would reset. He looked at Jessalyn, not at headlines, not at the board, and she felt the weight of the choice. He finally said, "No reassignment, no statement beyond the truth. She's indispensable to this company." Brows lifted, cordiality thinned. Another director leaned in. "Protecting an assistant at the expense of market confidence is irresponsible. If you won't act, the board will consider remedies." The call ended. Quiet pooled. Jessalyn collected her folder. "I won't be the reason they come for you," she said. "You aren't," Ellis replied. "But I will be," she answered. "They've already decided the shape of me. If I stay, I confirm it. If I go, I end it." He stepped closer. "We end it by refusing the premise." Her smile was small. "You can afford to refuse. I can't." The day pressed forward. Jessalyn answered emails, built schedules, declined reporters. Gold Digger repeated under headlines. A gossip site found an old photo of her bussing tables and captioned it, "Rags to Riches?" Another ran a blurry shot of her mother's thrift store dress as if evidence. At lunch, she walked a long block alone. The city, once neutral, revealed its appetite. A passerby recognized her and snapped a photo without asking. Another smirked, "Get it, girl." She kept walking until the buildings thinned and she could breathe. That afternoon, Serena sent flowers big enough to occupy a lobby. The card was empty. The message was not. Jessalyn asked facilities to donate the bouquet to the hospital. When she turned, Ellis stood in the doorway, something fierce and helpless braided together. "I can fight them," he said. "I know," she answered, "but I shouldn't have to be fought for to be allowed to exist." He exhaled. "Stay, please." Her decision had been assembling all day, one headline, one stare, one memory at a time. She thought of diner napkins she once drew on, of the sketchbook hidden in her cabinet, of the girl who learned to be useful because being luminous felt dangerous. She thought of Ellis on the terrace, lonely and honest. She thought of Davenport's polished contempt, and she thought of how standing beside Ellis made her feel visible, and how visibility could also be a blade. "I'm resigning," she said. The words were simple, devastating. Ellis shook his head once as if he could undo sound. "We can navigate this. Give me a week." "If I give you a week, they'll take a pound of flesh," she said softly, "and it will be mine." He swore, a quiet word that tasted of grief. "Don't let them define us." "I'm choosing to define myself," she replied, "before they do." In her small apartment that night, she folded the gown back into its garment bag. The room smelled faintly of jasmine and starch. She set the badge she had worn for years on the counter beside her keys. Her phone buzzed with messages she did not open. She pulled the sketchbook from its hiding place and laid it on the table. Her hands trembled, but not from fear alone. Possibility has a tremor, too. Ellis stood alone in his office, the city burning under glass. The board's email arrived, measured, menacing, full of fiduciary duty. He wanted to call her, send a car, show up at her door and ask her to let him try. Instead, he stared at the empty chair across from his desk and understood that power cannot purchase the "and" of every sentence. Sometimes it must live inside the "or." Morning would bring statements and markets and the next battle. Tonight brought only absence, the knowledge that a woman who had held up his empire had been humiliated for daring to be seen, and that she had walked away to save them both from a ledger that would always tally against her first. For now. Dawn thinned over the river, and Ellis had not gone home. The board's threat coiled in his inbox, but the empty chair across from his desk was the only message he could read. Headlines clung to Jessalyn, and the quiet sentence that freed and broke him. "I'm resigning." Power had meant leverage. Now it meant nothing without the one person he could not bend. At sunrise, he chose without consulting optics. He sent a line to the board. "Do not contact Ms. Hart. Any pressure on her reflects on me." Closed the laptop and took the elevator into air that smelled like rain. Ward matched his stride with questions. Ellis waved them away. "Where does she go when she needs quiet?" Ward hesitated. "Gray Harbor," a cliff walk, a stand called Turn. She sketches there. She had built him a fortress and kept for herself a strip of wind and salt he had never asked about. "Bring the car," Ellis said. "Then take the day." Highway yielded to wet fields and gulls bright as torn paper. Ellis watched horizon instead of drafting statements. 2 hours later, steel thinned to cottages and a harbor where boats rocked like sleeping animals. He found the stand, Turn in peeling paint, and a path that climbed. She was there. Jessalyn stood on the overlook. Hair in a knot the wind was untying, coat belted, sketchbook braced to the rail. She drew quickly, eyes moving between sea and page. Ellis stopped 10 paces back and let the ache of seeing her separate wash through him. She felt him before she turned. Ellis Vance arrived like gravity. She closed the sketchbook, faced him with steadiness he admired. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know," he answered. "But I am." Her gaze touched the empty path, the day meant to be hers. "The board will love this." "They already hate me," he said. Wind rushed the cliff. "What do you want, Ellis?" He had asked himself 1,000 versions and dodged them all. Here, with the sea refusing to flatter him, he answered, "You." Her breath caught. "You wanted me last night, and look what it cost." "I wanted you long before last night," he said. "I just didn't let the wanting speak. I measured everything in risk, and then you walked in wearing midnight and the arithmetic failed. I thought protecting the company would protect you. I was wrong. I let them reduce you to a headline because it was easier than admitting I cared." She searched his face for a trick. There was none. "Care isn't enough," she said. "It won't fix the stories they tell about me, or the ones I hear when I'm alone." "No," he agreed, "but clarity might." He stepped closer. "You were never a pawn. You are the person I trust beyond any board or contract, beyond the version of myself that survives by not needing anyone. When you resigned, I understood the life I've built is smaller than the love I could choose. I don't want smaller." She looked at her knuckles, at the groove the pencil had left, at cliffs on the paper. "Do you know what it is to be looked at and not seen?" she asked. "I made peace with it. I organized your days until I forgot my own. Then you looked at me like the world had turned, and I didn't know whether to run or believe." "Believe me now," he said. "Not because I can buy our way out of noise, but because I am standing on a cliff without armor telling you I cannot go back to my life without you. Not as my secretary, as the woman I love." She flinched at the word. The tide hammered below. "Don't say it if you don't know what it means." "I know it means losing," he said. "The illusion that independence is invincibility. Investors who prefer statues. Denial. I also know it means breath. I slept in a museum of my own making. You opened a window." Her laugh broke on a tear. She wiped it away, annoyed. "I have loved you for years," she confessed, "in ways that were safe. Coffee right, staying late, learning your silences. I told myself it was loyalty. It was love I could bear because it required nothing from you. I never believed you could see me as anything but the system that kept your life from catching fire." "I see you," he said. "Not as function. As Jessalyn, who sketches before the light moves, who tells the doorman good morning, who stood in a room that tried to shame her and did not bow." Her breath steadied. "And if I come back?" she asked. "You don't come back," he said. "You go forward, into whatever you want. If you never work for me again, I'll still be in the front row of whatever you make. I'll fund a studio if you want it, or bring you coffee to a kitchen table if you don't. I don't care about the form, only the fact of you." He reached, slow enough to be refused, and took her hand. His palm was warm. The wind had teeth. Below, a wave shattered and reformed. "You once asked where I go when I need quiet," she said. "It's here." "I'm not here to take it," he answered. "I'm here to ask if there's room for me." She looked over the water, weighed the cost, the headlines, the board, the woman in scarlet, Doubt hardened into habit. Then she looked at the man who had built a life on refusal and arrived with nothing but truth. "There might be," she said. He set his forehead to hers, not a triumph, but a vow. Wind flipped the sketchbook pages. From the stand below came a bell. In a world that prefers declarations under chandeliers, two people chose a cliff, a morning, and a word that could hold. Together, they turned toward the path down, not to begin again, but to begin. The week after Ellis found Jessalyn at the cliffside, the city prepared itself for another spectacle, the annual Global Commerce Summit, where every deal-maker, investor, and reporter with teeth circled like hawks above prey. It was the kind of arena Ellis Vance had always dominated, controlled, sharp, armored in numbers. This year, though, his armor was fractured. The board had not softened. The press had not relented. Jessalyn's absence in the office echoed like a hollow drumbeat. Yet he had chosen, and now he would prove it. Not in private words on a windswept path, but in the blinding lights where truth could not be disguised. The ballroom dwarfed the gala. Cameras lined the aisles, lenses glinting like predatory eyes. The stage was a monolith of glass and steel, Ellis's name etched across the program in bold. Rows of men and women dressed in prestige filled the seats. Whispers moved through them. Would he address the scandal? Would he distance himself? Would the empire reassert its control? When Ellis entered, silence thudded like a wave. He wore his authority in every measured step, but tonight there was something more, a tension, a gravity. And at his side, walking in deliberate calm, was Jessalyn. She had not wanted to come. Hours before, in his penthouse, she had whispered, "I'm not built for their eyes, Ellis. I don't want to be dissected, mocked, dismissed again." He had taken her hands and answered, "You won't stand alone. Not this time." She had believed him, though fear still coiled in her. Now, beneath the sharp flash of cameras, her palms sweated, but she held her chin high. Ellis guided her to the front row, deliberately seating her where every camera would see. He took the stage alone, adjusting the microphone with a precision that betrayed nothing of the storm inside him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, resonant, "we are here to discuss the future of commerce, technology, and innovation. But before we do, let me address the whispers." The crowd shifted, eager. Headlines already sharpened their pens. Ellis's eyes scanned the room, then settled not on the board, not on the rivals, but on Jessalyn. His words sharpened. "For weeks, speculation has circled around me and the woman you saw at the gala. Some of you labeled her a pawn, others a distraction. The cruelest called her a gold digger. I have remained silent. That ends now." The silence thickened, cameras snapping like sparks. "She is not my distraction," Ellis said, his voice rising. "She is not my scandal nor my shield. She is Jessalyn Hart, the woman who has stood beside me when this company faltered, the one who saw me at my most hollow and did not look away. She is the reason my empire still stands, and the reason I stand at all. And she is not my secretary anymore. She is the woman I love." Gasps broke like glass across the ballroom. A reporter dropped her pen. Kincaid stiffened. Serena's smirk faltered. The board exchanged glances that cut. Yet Ellis did not waver. He let the words fill the hall, undeniable, irreversible. Jessalyn's breath hitched, every eye on her now, no place to hide. Heat rushed her cheeks, fear clawing, but then Ellis's gaze anchored her steady and unyielding. He had burned his armor in front of them all, for her, and in that fire, she felt her own strength kindle. She straightened, shoulders back, hands stilling in her lap. For once, she did not feel like a secretary at a stranger's table. She felt like herself, fully, fiercely seen. The questions came fast, reporters shouting, "Mr. Vance, are you risking shareholder trust? Ms. Hart, how long have you been involved? Is this serious or temporary?" Ellis lifted a hand, silencing the frenzy with ease. This is not temporary. This is permanent. If anyone doubts my commitment, let them doubt. My company is strong, but without integrity, it is nothing. And denying love for optics is the worst corruption of all. He stepped down from the stage, ignoring protocol, ignoring the stiff board members calling his name. The cameras followed as he walked directly to Jessalyn. She rose as he reached her heart hammering in her throat. Jessalyn, he said, low enough for her but loud enough for the microphones. I meant every word. Her lips trembled, her fear warring with the tidal wave of emotion. She searched his face, the man who had once believed love was a transaction, now dismantling his empire's facade for her. Do you know what this means? She whispered. Yes, Ellis said. It means I choose you. In the light, in the noise, in the fire. I choose you. Her eyes blurred. She had dreamed once, secretly, of being loved by him, but never dared imagine it spoken here with the world watching. Her answer trembled past her lips. Then I choose you, too. The hall erupted, not with questions now, but with a storm of flashes, murmurs, applause scattered in astonishment. Rivals who thought they could spin her into scandal fell silent, because Ellis had rewritten the narrative in one bold stroke. Not scandal, but devotion. He cupped her face, and under the unrelenting lights, he kissed her. It was not a polite gesture, not a performance. It was raw, certain, earned. Her hands clung to him, the noise of the world collapsing into the thundering truth between them. The kiss was a vow. Against odds, against power, against fear, they had chosen each other. When they pulled apart, Jessalyn's cheeks were wet, but her smile was steady. Ellis's hand remained at her back, protective and proud. Together they turned toward the hall, no longer armor and secretary, but man and woman who had faced the fire and refused to burn apart. The board sat stiff and furious, but powerless. The media, silenced not by denial, but by audacity, scribbled not rumors but history. And Jessalyn, though terrified, found strength in the unwavering devotion at her side. She was no longer hiding behind him. She was standing with him. That night, away from the flashes and the frenzy, Ellis took her hand in the quiet of his apartment. The city roared beneath them, but in the hush of that space, they finally allowed themselves to breathe. You're not my secretary, he whispered against her hair. She smiled, pressing her forehead to his. No, I'm the woman you love. And the woman I will never let go, he vowed. They kissed again, not for cameras, not for defense, but for themselves. Passionate, tender, complete. The union they forged was not built on optics or armor, but on truth. Together, they had chosen love. And together, they would face whatever storms came next. I measure my life now in color instead of calendars. A few months can stretch like canvas when you're finally painting what you were afraid to admit you wanted. Morning light pours across my studio floor, warming jars of brushes and a row of muslin dress forms. The space is a converted warehouse above a coffee roastery. When they grind beans, the air lifts with a nutty hum. I open the windows, and the city inhales with me. He found this place. Actually, he insisted I take it after the summit after he said love in front of people who treat feelings like volatility. He didn't do it to own my dream. He did it to make room for it. The lease is in my name. The first time I unlocked the door, he hung back and said, "Tell me where I fit." Sometimes he's on the floor with me, sleeves rolled, pinning hems as carefully as he once pinned down hostile takeovers. He is learning that fabric has politics too. Bias grain, drape, the way silk refuses command. We spar about measurements. He wants numbers. I want movement. He has softened. I have stopped apologizing for the space I take up. Balance is two hands steadying the same bolt of cloth. I still keep schedules. Mine now, not his. Commissions hang on the rack. a dancer's midnight dress, a daylight suit, and a storm blue gown that keeps asking me to free it. Sometimes Ellis stands near that gown and smiles like he recognizes a night we survived. I see him differently too. Not as a myth wearing my boyfriend's face, but as a man who carried old solitude and sets it down. He makes coffee the wrong way and leaves notes the right way. When the papers took one last swing and tried to fold me back into a headline, he went to the market and came home with peonies and cherries and the kind of quiet that says you choose who you are. We made rules. No work talk after 8. No disappearing into pride. Tell the truth before it curdles. He still runs an empire. I still hate cameras. Somehow, we meet in the middle at a long table scattered with pattern paper. The first month I told my mother. She cried, not from worry, but relief that I had given the girl with diner napkin sketches a chance. Ellis loves her because she does not flinch at him. The second month I hired Maya, a student from the neighborhood with quick hands and quicker opinions. She laughs when I draft too carefully and says, "Trust your line." Ellis calls her our CFO of Thread, and she calls him the intern, because she makes him steam seams when he lingers. By the third month, invitations to galas started arriving. I turned them down until one came from the City Arts Foundation, their annual ball to fund community studios and scholarships for kids who draw on napkins. I said yes, but only if I could donate a piece to the auction. They asked for a title. I wrote, "The Secretary's Night." The week before, I worked past midnight, pinning constellations of crystal into that storm blue gown. Ellis read reports nearby, talking about stars and risk. When I pricked my finger and hissed, he kissed the drop away as if it mattered. On the night of the ball, I zipped into a suit the color of graphite, sharp as a promise. He put on his tux and a calm I hadn't seen before. We walked into the hall hand in hand. There were cameras, yes. There were also children in borrowed shoes and artists with paint under their nails. No one asked who I was to him. They asked about the dress on the mannequin and the sketchbook on the shelf. Serena was there, luminous and a little less cruel. She handed me a seltzer and said, "You look like a woman who sleeps well." I said, "Most nights." She glanced at Ellis and nodded. He looks better, too. The auction rose and fell in waves. When the Secretary's Night turned on the platform and caught the light, the room quieted. I kept my eyes on the young girl at the back who craned her neck and mouthed, "Wow." The paddles lifted. A museum director and a philanthropist volleyed numbers until the gavel came down. The money would open a studio 2 blocks from where I grew up. Later, under the balcony's softer lights, Ellis pressed his forehead to mine. "You did that," he said. I wanted to tell him he had done something just as improbable. He had made space. Instead, I said, "We did. We danced, not to be watched, to remember the first orbit we held without losing ourselves." At midnight, the director asked me to speak. I hate microphones. My knees shook. But I thought of diner napkins and thrift store dresses and peonies on bad news mornings, and I said, "There are rooms that tell you who you are allowed to be. Build new rooms." Afterward, a teenage boy approached, gold paint on his fingers. "Is it true?" he asked. "You were a secretary?" "Yes," I said. "And now, this?" "Now this." When we left, the air was velvet and humming with late traffic. Ellis laced our fingers and squeezed. The silent "I'm here" we learned to speak without words. The city glittered, but I didn't feel outnumbered anymore. Do you believe love can blossom in the most unexpected places, like between a boss and a secretary? Let us know your thoughts. Tonight, when I lock the studio, the storm blue dress will be gone, headed toward a girl I will never meet. Tomorrow, light will pool at windows again, and the roastery will sing. Ellis will show up with wrong coffee and a grin. I will measure in color, not calendars, and in the sturdy ways people choose each other every day. We found our room. We keep making it bigger. Together.